I came home from a 12-hour shift at the hospital to find my front door wide open. Now I know I locked it. I triple-checked it like I always do before heading out. I work trauma. I see what people can do when they think no one's watching. So yeah, when your front door is dangling open like a loose tooth, adrenaline hits. I stepped inside slowly, keys clenched between my fingers just in case. My living room looked ransacked. Cushions tossed, drawers open, even my fridge was open like someone had been inspecting leftovers. That's when I heard it heels clacking on the tile from the hallway. "Isaiah, oh good you're home," came a voice I recognized instantly. Karen McDaniels, the HOA president, a middle-aged woman with the haircut, the attitude, and the God complex to match. She walked out of the hallway like she owned the place, holding a clipboard and a tape measure. I stared at her. "Karen, what the hell are you doing in my house?" She blinked at me, completely unfazed. Routine compliance check. "We've had reports about non-HOA approved modifications to your windows. It's in the bylaws. You broke into my house over windows. I didn't break in. Your spare key is in that fake rock by the hydrangeas. Everyone knows that." I clenched my jaw. "That doesn't make it legal. You can't enter my home without permission. That's literally trespassing." "Oh, don't be dramatic," she said, brushing past me like I was the unwelcome one. "If you have nothing to hide, you shouldn't be so upset. The HOA has the right to ensure community standards. You're done." I cut her off. "Get out now," she scoffed. "I'll be reporting this attitude in the next board meeting." I didn't respond. Just watched her walk out like she'd done nothing wrong, but inside I was boiling. I called the police. They said unless I had video evidence or she damaged anything, it'd be hard to press charges. Fine. She wanted to play games. I'd play smarter. That night I changed every lock on every door, installed 2 new cameras, one covering the front porch, another inside the hallway facing the entry. I even moved the fake rock just for fun. 3 days later, while I was at work, I got a motion alert on my phone. The camera inside showed Karen using the same fake rock to unlock my front door. She stepped inside like she lived there, clipboard in hand again. This time, though, she couldn't get far. The deadbolt didn't budge. She jiggled it, confused. Then she noticed the camera. Her face froze. I called the police from the break room, gave them access to the footage, and told them everything. By the time I got home, she was sitting in the back of a squad car, arms crossed and yelling something about her rights as HOA president. Officer Morales turned to me. "You were right to change the locks." She admitted she entered without permission. "That's a felony under state law," Karen shrieked from the car. "I was protecting property values." I just looked at her. "You were trespassing, on camera." The neighbors started coming out, phones in hand, whispering. For once, I didn't mind the attention. By the next morning, the entire neighborhood knew. Not because I told them, but because someone had already posted the squad car photo on the local community app. It didn't take long for the comments to spiral. A few of the usual board loyalists tried to defend her, talking about community oversight and protecting neighborhood integrity. But they were drowned out by people asking if their homes had been entered too. The fallout began quietly. I noticed a few homes had suddenly installed cameras that hadn't been there the day before. One guy down the street, Jerry, retired Army mechanic, put up a handwritten sign on his front lawn. "This property is monitored by a veteran with nothing to lose." I didn't know whether to laugh or shake his hand. That afternoon, a plain tan sedan pulled into my driveway. A tall man in a charcoal suit got out and walked up with a leather folder under one arm. He introduced himself as Detective Langford from the county's Special Investigations Unit. Apparently, once the footage went public, it triggered a deeper look into Karen's activities. Langford flipped open his folder and showed me a printed map with red marks across various lots in the neighborhood. These are all the homes she's entered in the last 7 months. We confirmed it through a combination of witness accounts and HOA meeting logs where she mentioned interior assessments. Most residents didn't even know she'd been inside. My stomach tightened. She was doing this regularly? Looks like it. We've got statements from 8 homeowners so far. Some said they noticed things misplaced but didn't connect the dots. One couple found peanut butter fingerprints on their baby's high chair and thought it was their toddler. They live alone. He asked if I'd testify if charges were brought forward. Absolutely, I said without hesitation. The next week, the HOA board called an emergency meeting in the community center. The timing was suspicious, middle of the day on a Tuesday. Most folks had jobs. But I had a flexible shift that week, so I showed up early, grabbed a seat in the back, and kept my phone recording in my lap just in case. Only 3 board members showed. The vice president, a wiry guy named Doug with glasses too big for his head, opened with a shaky gavel knock and cleared his throat. We're here to discuss the unfortunate legal situation surrounding our president, Karen McDaniels. Due to ongoing proceedings, she's temporarily stepped down. Temporarily, he repeated, glancing at the other 2 as if they needed reminding. A woman in the second row stood up. I recognized her, Mrs. Patel. She'd lived here since the subdivision was built. Can you explain how she had keys to our homes? You're acting like this is some parking violation. She invaded our privacy. Doug adjusted his glasses and muttered something about legacy access protocols and standard oversight measures. Someone else called out, "Say it in English, Doug." He shifted uncomfortably. Karen had access because she was entrusted with property inspections. The board granted her authority to know, I interrupted from the back. The bylaws say the HOA can request access for exterior inspections, not interior, and only with 72-hour written notice. He blinked at me, caught off guard. Well, yes, but there was precedent. No, there wasn't. The room was quiet for a beat, then another woman stood up and said, "She went through my medicine cabinet." That did it. The room exploded in overlapping voices. Someone shouted about missing documents. Another mentioned a pet that had been mysteriously let out. It turned into a full-on town hall revolt. I sat back and let the chaos unfold. By the end, the board couldn't even finish the agenda. They packed up and left early, faces pale and tight-lipped. 2 days later, I was served a letter in a plain envelope. It wasn't from the HOA, it was from the county prosecutor. They were formally charging Karen with unlawful entry, trespass, and abuse of authority. They'd also found evidence she'd accessed HOA funds to pay for inspection supplies, which included things like a new designer handbag and a plane ticket to Arizona. Langford called again. "We're preparing a hearing. The prosecutor may want you as a primary witness." I told him I'd be ready. Meanwhile, the board scrambled. They tried to shift blame, issuing a vague apology letter saying they were unaware of the full extent of the president's activities. The letter was printed on cheap paper and stuffed into mailboxes by a desperate-looking teenager who clearly didn't want to be involved. But the damage was done. A group of us started meeting informally, people who'd had enough. We called ourselves the Compliance Reform Committee. Just neighbors at first, but within a week, we had 27 members. We started digging minutes from board meetings, financial records, anything we could find. One woman, Danielle, used to work in forensic accounting for the IRS. She found over $6,000 in miscellaneous expenses that couldn't be traced. We brought it all to the county. Langford called again a week later. "You might want to come down to the courthouse next Thursday. It'll be public." The hearing was packed. Karen sat beside her attorney, arms tightly folded, lips pressed into a line. She didn't look up as I took the stand. I told the truth, nothing dramatic, just what happened, what I saw, what the footage showed. The prosecutor asked me one question to end it. "Why did you install the camera?" I looked at the judge. "Because I stopped feeling safe in my own home." That seemed to hit home. They played the footage. Even with no sound, her expression when the lock didn't turn was loud enough. The whole room watched her try, fail, and then realize she was being recorded. You could have heard a pin drop. When it was over, the judge didn't deliberate long. Karen was placed under supervised release, pending trial. She was barred from entering the subdivision. The board tried to issue a statement that night calling the situation regrettable and thanking residents for their continued trust. But by then, the Reform Committee had filed paperwork for a recall vote. We canvassed every street, talked to every homeowner. By the end of the second week, we had enough signatures to force a full board election. I wasn't planning to run. I didn't want the spotlight, but Danielle cornered me outside the community center. "You're the reason this house of cards started falling. People trust you." I told her I was a trauma nurse, not a politician. "Exactly," she said. "You're not interested in power, that's why we need you." I thought about it. Then I said yes. By the end of the month, the vote was held. Turnout was higher than any HOA election in the subdivision's history. Every single incumbent was replaced. I won the seat with 71% of the vote, the first motion I introduced as new board president, a full audit of all past financial activity. The second, an amendment to the bylaws. No HOA official shall enter any property, for any reason, without the express written consent of the owner, witnessed and documented by two neutral parties. Any violation will result in immediate dismissal and prosecution under state law. It passed unanimously. Karen's trial is still pending. But the neighborhood, it's changed. Cameras are up, locks are new, and people finally walk their dogs and wave again. Funny how accountability brings peace. 3 weeks after the election, I found myself sitting in the county records office, flipping through a cardboard box of old HOA meeting transcripts that smelled faintly of mildew and toner. I wasn't looking for nostalgia, I was hunting for patterns, signatures, anything that might explain how Karen had stayed in power so long with no real oversight. Danielle had flagged a set of financial authorizations signed under a different treasurer's name, someone who hadn't lived in the neighborhood in over a year. That was the first red flag of the day. The second came when I found a scanned permit request dated last winter supposedly for community drainage maintenance with a forged signature from the city utilities department. I called Langford again. "You said you were still following the paper trail." "I think I just found a fresh one." He didn't hesitate. "Where are you?" By that evening, both Langford and a city investigator named Morales were sitting at my dining table, going through the same records I'd marked with sticky notes. Morales traced her finger down a printout and muttered, "This is not a legit permit. The department never approved a project on this block. This seal's been copied from an old file. It's pixelated." Langford leaned forward. "Isaiah, you said the HOA diverted funds for miscellaneous expenses." "Yeah." Danielle traced a chunk of it to a separate checking account, not under the HOA's name. "It's listed as Civic Neighborhood Beautification Initiative. Sounds impressive, right?" Morales looked up sharply. "That's not just shady. That's wire fraud and misappropriation of municipal identifiers. If she used that fake permit to authorize a project, she's cooked." And she had. According to more documents we dug up, Karen had pushed through a landscaping upgrade last December, contracted a company from 2 towns over, paid them nearly $20,000 from HOA funds, and never got approval from the city. Half the work was never completed and the company dissolved 3 months later. The address on the invoice, a P.O. box in Arizona, Langford's expression darkened. "We're going to need to escalate this. Federal charges are on the table now." I thought that would be the peak. It wasn't. At the next Reform Committee meeting, Jerry showed up with something unusual. He slid a manila envelope across the table. "I was cleaning out the crawl space under my porch," he said. "Found this stuffed behind a vent. Thought it might belong to the old owners." Inside were 3 memory cards, each labeled with a date from last year. Danielle offered to check them out. By the next evening, she'd called me, her voice tight. "I think you better come over." The footage was grainy but unmistakable. It was from a motion-activated camera hidden, likely without the owner's knowledge, inside the home of a family that had moved out 6 months ago. It showed Karen inside, going through a filing cabinet. She wasn't taking anything. She was photographing documents. "There's timestamps," Danielle said. She entered at 2 in the morning. According to property sale records, the house was unoccupied. Langford reviewed it and confirmed it. That crosses into federal territory, surveillance without consent in an unoccupied residence. She just added an invasion of privacy felony. The footage made its way to the state prosecutor's office. Karen's pending trial expanded into a full investigation, now involving state and federal charges. She was rearrested within 48 hours, this time without bail. Her attorney tried to argue diminished capacity, citing extreme stress from years of community leadership. No one bought it. Meanwhile, the new board faced a different kind of storm. We found out that several of the old board members had quietly signed indemnity clauses months before the election clauses that protected them from personal liability under HOA decisions. But they were only valid if the decisions were made in good faith and without knowledge of impropriety. Thanks to the treasure trove of forged documents, that defense crumbled. Each one of them received a formal letter from the neighborhood's newly contracted legal counsel. Their assets weren't touched yet, but the warnings were clear: cooperate with investigators or face civil suits from the HOA itself. Doug tried to protest. He showed up at one meeting, red-faced and defensive. I didn't know what she was doing. "She handled all the contractor stuff. You signed off on the payments," I told him. "You initialed every expense report. You never asked where the money was going." He looked around the room, but there were no allies left. Even his longtime friends from the old board sat in silence. "I thought she had the permits. She said the city was no one checked. That's the problem." Doug left 15 minutes later and didn't come back. By mid-July, the neighborhood had found a strange rhythm again. Mailboxes were fixed. Sidewalks were clean. But there was a tension under the surface, residents still wary, still watching, and that was fine. We wanted transparency hardwired now. We held monthly open forums. Every resident received detailed financial breakdowns. Danielle created a public ledger, updated weekly. And most importantly, we rewrote the charter itself, scrapping the old bylaws and replacing them with a new model based on city standards and legal templates. No vague language. No legacy loopholes. At one of the forums, I noticed a woman sitting near the back who kept scribbling notes. After the session, she approached me. "You're the president, for now," I said. "Until someone better comes along." She extended a hand. "Name's Alina. I work for a housing policy nonprofit. We track HOA abuses across the state. Just wanted to say what you're doing here." "It's rare." I shook her hand. "I wish it weren't," she nodded slowly. "We're working on a case in another county, similar issues. If you're willing to share what you've done here, how you documented everything, it could help a lot of people." I agreed, not because I wanted attention, but because maybe, if other neighborhoods knew how to stand up, fewer people would end up with strangers in their hallways pretending to protect property values. A month later, the trial began. The courtroom was packed. News outlets had picked up the story after the second arrest. The headline that spread fastest was, "HOA president accused of running illegal surveillance ring." Not entirely accurate, but close enough. I testified again. So did Danielle, Jerry, Mrs. Patel, and 9 others. Each told a different piece of the story. The prosecutor's office painted a picture not just of one rogue official, but of a system that rewarded silence and punished questions. Karen's defense tried to stall, claimed she was acting with board approval. But with every forged form, every unauthorized entry, every shady transaction laid out in black and white, her excuses collapsed. The jury returned the verdict in under 2 hours, guilty, on all counts. She was sentenced to 6 years in state prison, followed by mandatory restitution to the HOA and the individual homeowners affected. Total penalties exceeded $120,000. The court also ordered a permanent ban on her serving in any leadership role in any housing association within the state. After the sentencing, some neighbors wanted to celebrate. I didn't. It wasn't a victory parade. It was a reminder of how easily trust can be weaponized. But there was a quiet moment, maybe a week later, when I walked through the neighborhood just after sunset. Kids were riding scooters, someone was grilling, porch lights flicked on one by one, and for the first time in a long time, everything felt normal. No more secret inspections. No more unauthorized entries, just peace. That was enough. A month after the trial, I received a registered letter addressed to me as HOA president. The return address wasn't familiar, something out of Tallahassee with a government seal stamped in red. Inside was a formal notice from the Florida Department of Business and Professional Regulation. They'd opened a secondary investigation into the HOA under state housing statute violations. Apparently, the trial had triggered multiple complaints from past residents who had moved out years ago, each with eerily similar stories: unauthorized entries, unexplained fines, and sudden foreclosure threats. One name popped up more than once: Douglas Fry. Not the former Vice President Doug from the board, this was a different man entirely. According to the letter, Fry had been the HOA's contracted compliance assessor years ago. He had never appeared in any meeting minutes, never submitted a report under his own name, and yet he'd been paid monthly. Quietly, through transfers routed via third-party property management firms. I brought this to Danielle and our new treasurer, Kelsey. They'd already been combing through the HOA's archived financials, trying to untangle what was real and what had been fabricated. Kelsey narrowed her eyes at the line items. See this? She pointed to a recurring payment labeled only as Civic Oversight Services. That's him. It's been disguised under different vendor names every 6 months. How far back? Almost 11 years. Danielle tapped her keyboard. That predates Karen. She didn't start until 8 years ago, which means someone before her brought this guy in. It was a deeper rot than we'd imagined, and it meant the corruption hadn't started with Karen, it had just matured under her. The next day, I drove to the county recorder's office to request physical HOA documents going back 15 years. The receptionist handed me a battered box, dust blooming off the lid as I opened it. Inside were handwritten meeting minutes, old receipts, and stapled permit applications, all predating digital records. That's when I found it. A signed letter from the HOA board president in 2011 authorizing Fry to conduct discrete property assessments to ensure compliance with community aesthetics. No board vote, no resident notification, just a signature, the name on the letter, Bennett Rowe. I remembered the name. He'd been the original HOA president when the subdivision was first built. Moved out in 2015, supposedly for health reasons. But there were rumors, quiet ones, about a dispute with the city over code enforcement. Nothing ever confirmed. Back at home, I called Langford. I might have found something bigger, I said. How far back does your jurisdiction go? His response was immediate. If it involves fraudulent use of HOA funds or forged documents, there's no expiration. Especially if it crossed into municipal or federal territory. I scanned the letter and sent it to him. He called back 20 minutes later. That name's familiar, Langford said. Rowe was involved in a complaint filed by a resident in 2013. The report said he threatened foreclosure over unpaid dues that were never actually billed. Case was dropped when the homeowner moved out. So he started this. Karen picked up where he left off. Looks that way. I'm looping in the state attorney. 2 days later, subpoenas were issued for the HOA's archived communications and contracts. The property management firm that had handled our subdivision for the past decade was also named. When agents arrived to seize physical servers from their Midtown office, it made the evening news. The fallout was immediate. Dozens of residents from neighboring communities began sending in statements. One couple showed up at our next open forum with a folder full of letters, threats from the HOA years ago demanding payment for unauthorized roof color deviation. The photos used as evidence were clearly photoshopped. Their roof had never been changed. They tried to lee in our home, the husband said, voice shaking. We only got them to back off after hiring a lawyer. Danielle looked at the paperwork, flipping through the pages. These are Karen's signatures, she said. But the formatting matches the ones from Roe's era. Langford confirmed it. The fraud had been systemized. The HOA had operated like a racketeering scheme, fabricating violations, issuing fines, and threatening foreclosure to scare people into paying. The funds were funneled through layers of shell vendors, some of which led to accounts in Nevada and Delaware. The total estimated theft, over $300,000 across 11 years. The state attorney general held a press conference. It was surreal seeing our subdivision's name on the backdrop. Charges were filed against 3 people. Karen, already in custody, Bennett Roe, located in New Mexico and extradited, and the CEO of the property management firm, who had quietly resigned a week earlier and was found trying to board a flight to Lisbon. By August, the case had expanded into a full-blown criminal enterprise investigation. The HOA itself wasn't just being audited, it was being dismantled. The state froze all HOA accounts pending court approval of restitution funds. A temporary trustee was appointed to handle administrative duties, while the reformed board transitioned the community to a self-managed structure. It was a long set of meetings, but by unanimous vote, we dissolved the old HOA charter and replaced it with a resident-controlled neighborhood council. No more mandatory dues, no more fines, just voluntary contributions and community votes, the first project funded by the new council. A neighborhood mural painted on the side of the old clubhouse, now repurposed into a shared community space. The design was simple, a pair of open hands beneath a blooming tree. Residents took turns painting sections of it, kids included. One afternoon, while organizing the painting supplies, I noticed Alina from the nonprofit walking along the sidewalk, snapping photos. "You planning to write this up?" I asked. "Already have," she said. "We're using it in training sessions for other neighborhoods. You've set a new precedent." "Feels more like we just cleaned up a mess," she smiled. "That's how real change starts." Later that week, I stepped down as president. I stayed on the council, but I didn't need the title anymore. I'd done what I came to do. On my last official day, I walked the perimeter of the neighborhood. Houses were freshly painted, yards were green and uncluttered, families chatted on porches. There was no tension in the air. No one watching from behind curtains or wondering if their mailbox would contain another threat, just a neighborhood. As it should have been all along, and when I reached my driveway, I looked at the new sign we'd installed on the community board. It read, "No one is above the rules." Not even the ones who write them. I unlocked my front door, still the same reinforced one I'd installed after Karen's first visit, and stepped inside. This time, I didn't check over my shoulder. I didn't have to.